The Mummy is the ultimate movie. Yeah, I said it, come at me. The Mummy is movie making in its ultimate form. You disagree? Well, then don't bother watching this and instead leave a rant in the comments, because it helps my engagement rate. But if you're interested in hearing what I have to say, watch on. So what do I mean when I say the ultimate movie? Well, that's hard to describe, but let's start with what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that it's the best movie ever made. I'm not saying it's got the world's best acting, the world's best cinematography, or even the most unique plot lines. Yeah, nah, see, The Mummy doesn't necessarily deserve an Oscar for best anything, really, when you watch it, right? But it does a lot of things on a lot of levels really, really well. There's a lot of deep, meaningful, and powerful films out there. There's some captivating performances, and there's movies that literally change the world. The Mummy isn't necessarily a film that does any of those things. Okay, so we know what the ultimate movie isn't, but what is the ultimate movie then, if it's not those things? Well, I think that The Mummy is a movie that reminds us of why we love movies, and it's the kind of movie that doesn't get made anymore. It came out at this interesting time in filmmaking when movies in general were moving away from heightened theatrical film to more grounded realism, and the technology of things like CGI were in a place where they could really deliver a lot in terms of visual spectacle, but it also wasn't economical to just shoot an entire film on green screen like it is today. So CGI was used sparingly, and for a blockbuster about action and adventure, that's pretty unique nowadays. All of this adds up to a cinematic experience that does feel grounded, punchy, and practical, but also sparingly creates visual awe and spectacle when and where it needs to. And if you ask me, a lot of the CGI in this film still kind of stands up today. I mean, there's certain things that don't, but for the most part, it works. But it also doesn't feel real necessarily, and I think that's important. Movies aren't meant to be real. They're meant to take us someplace new, someplace interesting, especially adventure films. I mean, look at James Bond, for example. It's a film franchise that's really built on the appeal around taking you on basically an exciting adventure to someplace you've likely never been and giving you fun toys that don't really exist in reality to create a very exciting and thrilling adventure. The Mummy accomplishes this exact same feeling of escapism. It takes us to a place that is rich in culture and history, but it also happens to be in a unique time, post-war 1930s, when Egyptology and archaeology were in their golden age. Based on the various real-world misadventures and horrors that befell Egyptian excavators backed by British and American financiers, The Mummy takes us on an exciting and interesting setting where we feel a sense of discovery that has become rarer in today's world, uncovering the mysteries of an ancient civilization with a past that has come for its reckoning. And it shows off a lot of, I don't know, maybe like stereotypical or cliche and quote exotic, which is not a good word to use anymore, but it shows off these things that we'd associate with ancient Egypt from a Western perspective, but also brings the ancient past to life for us on the big screen in a way that may not be historically or racially accurate at all, but shit, it's fun. And when it comes to the casting and the tone that the cast creates in this film, I think it captures lightning in a bottle, honestly. I mean, you've got Rachel Weisz and Brendan Fraser who take the lead in this film, both of whom have a kind of rom-com background, but also have a very distinct look about them and show off their ability to perform in genre-bending roles. But I don't think this movie could have been what it is without Jonathan, portrayed by John Hannah. I mean, he absolutely defines the quirky sidekick trope. He really makes it his own with the actor's unique ability to balance humor and heart in a character that is very cowardly and selfish at times, but absolutely lovable. And one thing I wish this movie had more of is scenes between him and Kevin J. O'Connor's Benny, who is a lot like the foil to Jonathan, really, in a lot of ways, but like the gross, slimy version of him, if you will.
Hey, you little stinkweed, where you been?
You also get a really well-rounded villain in this film in Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep. He's not the most compelling performance necessarily, and I don't think he's really had a lot of great roles since this movie, but they do a great job of taking this villain and creating a compelling motivation based on his forbidden love. And he's willing to literally go through hell and back just to be able to finally be with the woman that he loves. It's not a typical bad guy backstory, and I think it adds really a strong sense of purpose and makes him an intimidating bad guy because love can make you do absolutely bonkers shit with no regard for the cost, and that can be scary when you're going up against it. You can tell that he has a lot of ancient power that neither we nor the protagonists fully understand, but it comes from a place of love. And the way that they slowly bring him back to life piece by piece through this film creates a really strong sense of building up the stakes. He's like the Thanos of the 90s when you really think about it, right? Because like he's searching the world for these MacGuffins that will make him all powerful and able to accomplish his really understandable but misguided goal. And unlike other movies that follow a 3 or even 5-act structure, this is a 9-act film with 2 goals or false goal conflict, where we get the prologue, then we get the backstory on the key main players, then we finally get the setting and the goal of the film, which is to visit the city of the dead to discover riches and knowledge, where the Americans compete with the archaeologists, and that's like sort of the initial buildup, like that's what it seems like this movie's gonna be. But after the pursuit of that, and after that conflict kind of gets resolved pretty quickly, a new conflict arises, and the initial conflict is resolved, leading to a 4-part chase for these canopic jars, where the heroes slowly learn the purpose of these MacGuffins, and then finally, once the bad guy wins the second conflict, another run arises. They now have to resolve the consequences of their failed attempt to stop the bad guy in that second story arc, and each act builds on each other to create a really rich story where it's not just about the good guy and the bad guy anymore, but also about the unwitting cast of supporting factions that inhabit the world and whose greed and selfishness lead to the return of an ancient evil that threatens the world, or at least Egypt. And it accomplishes all of this in a 2-hour runtime that has perfect pacing, really well fleshed out characters, compounding stakes, a fantastical, wondrous setting, and amazing actor chemistry. And on top of all of that, on top of the chemistry of the characters and the rich background and the history and the story and the adventure and so much of just everything this movie has to offer, on top of all of that shit, it's got something for everyone. It's got action, it's got adventure, it's got romance, it's got history, it's got comedy and spectacle. It's got an underlying message about the hubris of man and the torment of love lost. It's even got a bit of buddy cop thing going on, right? Like the female lead in this movie sits right there on the same level as her male counterpart, who can hold her own in a man's world and who's ambitious and optimistic and just has this like overall respect for culture. Its brains paired up nicely with the brawn of the traditional action-adventure macho male lead who doesn't have to save the damsel but gets saved by the damsel in kind. The Mummy is the ultimate movie. It does everything well. It builds this story thoughtfully and carefully, and it revisits the myth of the Indiana Jones pulp adventure genre and blends it with elements of nearly every other genre, from horror to rom-com, and it's the kind of movie that you can just watch over and over, back to back, and I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves for being everything that a movie should be.